It began as a quiet refusal, barely more than a polite no whispered behind palace doors, but the ripple it created would soon shake the very foundation of royal unity. Sophie, long seen as the steady and uncontroversial figure within the firm, had drawn a line. And not just any line, but one that directly challenged Queen Camilla's latest move. What seemed like a routine co-signing request was about to unravel into something far more explosive. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. At first, the request itself carried no visible weight. According to reports circulating within palace administrative streams, Sophie had been approached discreetly, the proposal presented as yet another collaborative effort meant to strengthen the monarchy's charitable reach. A simple endorsement. A shared signature. A united front. That was how it was framed, and under normal circumstances, Sophie would have agreed without hesitation. Her reputation built on quiet loyalty, unwavering discipline, and an almost instinctive commitment to maintaining harmony within the institution. But something about this moment felt different. Insiders whisper that the timing alone raised questions. The foundation, still in its early conceptual phase, was already being spoken about as though it were a certainty, as though approvals had already been secured before they were formally granted. That in itself was unusual. Palace aides, often trained to detect even the faintest shift in internal dynamics, reportedly sensed an undercurrent forming a tension that could not yet be named, but was impossible to ignore. Sophie, instead of offering her immediate support, chose to pause. Not publicly, not dramatically, but quietly, deliberately. And that pause, subtle as it seemed, began to stretch longer than expected. Days passed, then more, and within that silence, assumptions started to unravel. Camilla's team, according to various interpretations of internal briefings, had already begun moving forward, preparing documents, outlining future engagements, and shaping a narrative that depended heavily on Sophie's involvement. Her name, her credibility, her presence, it was all being factored in, as if it were guaranteed. Yet Sophie remained still, observing, considering. It is now whispered in the highest echelons of royal circles that this was the moment everything began to shift. Because Sophie was not simply delaying, she was examining. Those familiar with her approach describe it as methodical, almost surgical in its precision. She did not reject immediately, nor did she endorse blindly. Instead, she chose to understand what lay beneath the surface of what had been presented to her. And what she found, according to multiple palace-adjacent sources, was not what she had expected. There were layers, subtle complexities, elements that didn't quite align with the straightforward image being projected. It was no longer just a question of support, it was a question of structure, of intent, of long-term consequence. And as that realization began to settle, the atmosphere behind palace doors reportedly grew heavier. Conversations became more cautious, movements more calculated. Even those not directly involved began to sense that something significant was unfolding. Because in a system where unity is often preserved at all costs, even the smallest hesitation can signal a much larger storm. And Sophie's silence? It was no longer being interpreted as neutrality. It was being read as resistance, a quiet, controlled, but unmistakable resistance that carried implications far beyond a single signature. Because if Sophie, one of the most dependable figures within the monarchy, was unwilling to move forward without question, then perhaps this wasn't as simple as it had first appeared. Perhaps this was something else entirely, something deeper, something that had yet to fully reveal itself. And that is what made the moment so unsettling. Because the calm had not broken yet, but everyone could feel it coming. And as the days continued to pass without a definitive answer, the anticipation began to build, tightening like a thread pulled too far, threatening to snap at any moment. Because behind that quiet refusal was not just doubt, it was discovery. But Sophie's silence wasn't hesitation, it was calculation, and what she uncovered would change everything. At first glance, the foundation appeared noble, another charitable extension of royal duty, wrapped in compassion and public service. But beneath the polished language and carefully crafted mission statements, something didn't sit right. Sophie wasn't just reviewing a proposal, she was examining a structure that, according to insiders, carried unusual clauses, unfamiliar beneficiaries, and a level of control that raised quiet alarms within palace corridors. The deeper she looked, the less ordinary it became. Reports suggest the foundation had been presented as a graceful act of unity, a way for senior royals to stand together under one charitable banner while King Charles remained burdened by illness and the monarchy searched for steadiness. But Sophie understood something many underestimated. Charity within the royal world is never just charity. It is reputation. It is influence. It is access. And when a name is placed beside a royal foundation, that name does not simply support the work, it helps legitimize the entire machine behind it. That was where the concern began. Different interpretations of the proposal describe a governance structure that seemed unusually concentrated, with influence reportedly leaning toward Camilla's trusted circle rather than a wider, more balanced royal oversight group. Nothing was said loudly. Nothing was accused directly. But the discomfort grew in the fine print. Certain advisory links appeared too close to familiar networks. Certain beneficiaries seemed vague. Certain powers, insiders claim, could have allowed the foundation's direction to remain quietly shaped by people outside the traditional royal charity structure. And that was when Sophie's caution became more than personal doubt, it became institutional alarm. She had spent years building a reputation not on spectacle, but on patience, discipline, and trust. She knew the cost of a careless endorsement. One misplaced signature could bind her name to decisions she did not control, choices she could not defend, and consequences that might one day be placed at her feet. Prince Edward, often described as the quiet sentinel of the family, reportedly understood her hesitation immediately. He did not need drama to see danger. His world was one of wording, precedent, and quiet service, and according to palace whispers, he encouraged Sophie to keep asking questions until the answers became clear. That support mattered, because pressure by then had begun to thicken. Camilla's side had expected cooperation, perhaps even gratitude. Sophie's delay was not part of the plan, and the longer she withheld approval, the more exposed the foundation became. What had been designed to look effortless now appeared fragile, dependent on a trust it had not fully earned. Behind the polished charitable language, a harder question was taking shape. Who would truly control this foundation once it launched? Would it serve the crown, or would it strengthen a private circle around the Queen? That distinction was everything. Because in the House of Windsor, the line between service and self-interest can never be allowed to blur. Sophie saw that line. She respected it, and she refused to step across it blindly. And as the details became clearer, Sophie realized this wasn't just a signature, it was a commitment she could not afford to make. When the answer finally came, it wasn't wrapped in diplomacy or softened by tradition, it was firm, direct, and impossible to ignore. Sophie had refused. Not delayed, not redirected, refused. And in a palace where unity is often preserved at all costs, such a move sent shockwaves through every level of the royal household, leaving aides scrambling and alliances suddenly uncertain. For a brief moment, there was silence, an almost stunned pause within the inner workings of the institution, as if the system itself needed time to process what had just happened. Because this was not how things were supposed to unfold. Sophie, by every account, was one of the most dependable figures within the monarchy. Someone who understood the delicate balance between personal judgment and collective responsibility. Her refusal was not just unexpected, it was disruptive. Reports suggest the decision was delivered with clarity, leaving little room for reinterpretation or negotiation. There were no vague reassurances, no softening language to cushion the impact. Instead, the reasoning pointed directly to concerns surrounding governance, structure, and long-term transparency. Those familiar with the situation whisper that Sophie's position was rooted in something deeper than disagreement. It was about principle, about protecting the integrity of what a royal foundation is meant to represent. But within the context of palace dynamics, such clarity can feel like defiance. And for Camilla, the refusal reportedly landed as a shock. Various interpretations of internal reactions describe a sense of disbelief within her circle, as though the outcome had never truly been considered a possibility. The assumption had always been alignment, cooperation, a seamless endorsement that would carry the foundation forward without resistance. Instead, what emerged was resistance in its most controlled form, calm, deliberate, and immovable. And that is what made it so powerful. Because Sophie did not raise her voice, she did not escalate the situation publicly. She simply stood her ground. And in doing so, she forced the entire structure around the foundation to confront a reality it had not prepared for. Internal communications, according to palace-adjacent sources, began to shift almost immediately. Urgency replaced confidence. Frustration replaced certainty. Efforts were reportedly made to reassess, to reframe, to find a path that could salvage the situation without exposing the fracture that had just formed. But the damage, subtle as it was, had already begun to spread. Because once a refusal of this magnitude is issued, it cannot be quietly undone. It lingers. It raises questions, and those questions, in a system built on perception as much as reality, can be more destabilizing than any public confrontation. It is now whispered in the highest echelons that figures like Prince William and Princess Anne began to take notice not with alarm, but with interest. Because Sophie's decision was not reckless, it was calculated, and that calculation suggested there was more beneath the surface than what had initially been presented. Meanwhile, outside the palace walls, the first murmurs began to surface. Media insiders, always attuned to even the faintest shift, started hinting at a royal disagreement. Careful not to overstate, but unable to ignore the signals emerging from within. The narrative was still controlled, still contained, but the tension was no longer invisible. And that was the turning point. Because what had started as a quiet internal matter was now beginning to edge towards something far more exposed. A disagreement not just about a foundation, but about influence, control, and the boundaries that define them. And as those boundaries were tested, the calm that once surrounded the project began to fracture in ways that could no longer be ignored. But the refusal was only the beginning, because Camilla was not prepared to let her plans collapse without a fight. What followed was not a public confrontation, but something far more controlled, far more strategic. Conversations intensified behind closed doors, with pressure mounting in subtle but unmistakable ways. Requests turned into expectations, and expectations into quiet demands. Yet Sophie remained unmoved, standing firm in a storm that was beginning to expose deeper fractures within the royal structure itself. The tone shifted almost immediately after her refusal. According to reports circulating within palace administrative streams, Camilla's team did not accept the decision as final. Instead, they recalibrated. Revised documents began to surface. Language was softened. Certain clauses, insiders suggest, were reworded or repositioned in an effort to make the foundation appear more balanced, more aligned with traditional royal governance. But the essence, as Sophie reportedly observed, remained unchanged. It was still the same structure, the same concentration of influence, only now presented with greater care. That is what made the situation more intense, not less. Because this was no longer about misunderstanding, it was about persistence. Private meetings were quietly arranged, each one framed as an opportunity to clarify concerns, to address hesitation, to bring the conversation back to unity. But those familiar with the dynamics described something more deliberate beneath the surface. These were not simple discussions, they were attempts to shift Sophie's position without forcing open conflict, a careful kind of pressure, applied slowly, designed to wear down resistance rather than confront it directly. And yet, Sophie did not move. Her stance, calm and measured, became increasingly difficult to challenge, because she was not reacting emotionally. She was holding her ground with quiet certainty, a certainty that seemed to grow stronger the more the situation unfolded. Prince Edward's support remained steady, almost understated, but deeply significant. He did not step forward publicly. He did not escalate the tension, but according to palace whispers, his presence reinforced Sophie's position, adding weight to her concerns without amplifying the conflict. That quiet alignment created something powerful, a sense that this was not an isolated hesitation, but a shared recognition of risk. At the same time, another force within the monarchy began to lean in. Princess Anne, long regarded as the guardian of discipline and structure, reportedly viewed the situation through a different lens, one shaped by decades of protecting the institution from precisely this kind of ambiguity. Various interpretations suggest she did not intervene directly, but her position was understood. Oversight mattered. Clarity mattered. And above all, the crown's integrity could not be compromised by uncertainty, no matter how carefully it was disguised. That alignment, Sophie, Edward, and the silent weight of Anne's principles began to create a divide that could no longer be ignored. It wasn't loud, it wasn't public, but it was real. On one side, a push to move forward, to secure momentum, to ensure the foundation launched as planned. On the other, a refusal to proceed without complete confidence in what that launch truly represented. And as that divide deepened, its effects began to ripple outward. Planning for the foundation's launch, once described as seamless, started to falter. Timelines became uncertain. Internal coordination slowed. What had been presented as a unified effort now carried the unmistakable strain of unresolved disagreement. Even those removed from the core decision-making process began to sense that something was off. Because in a system built on precision and control, even the smallest disruption can signal something far more significant beneath the surface. And this was no longer a small disruption. It was a standoff, quiet, controlled, but steadily intensifying. Each passing day brought the situation closer to a breaking point, where hesitation would no longer be sustainable and resolution could no longer be delayed. And as the deadline approached, it became clear that this standoff would not end quietly. It would force a decision with public consequences. The announcement never came. The carefully planned launch, the prepared speeches, the orchestrated unveiling, it all vanished almost overnight. What had once been positioned as a defining moment for Camilla's charitable legacy was now abruptly halted. And while the official explanation remained vague, those watching closely understood the truth. Without Sophie's backing, the foundation could not stand. For weeks, the momentum had been building, carefully constructed through quiet coordination and internal confidence. There had been timelines. There had been expectations. There had even been, according to various interpretations of palace briefings, an unspoken assumption that the final approval was merely a formality waiting to be completed. But when that final step never came, everything began to unravel, not loudly, not dramatically, but with a sudden and unmistakable absence. Reports suggest the initial decision was framed as a postponement, a temporary pause designed to allow for further alignment and refinement of objectives. The language was careful, almost deliberately neutral, offering no clear indication of the deeper tension that had led to this moment. Yet within palace circles, the shift was impossible to ignore. Because what had been described as inevitable was now uncertain, and uncertainty, within an institution built on control, carries its own kind of weight. Insiders whisper that behind the official statements, the reality was far less stable. The foundation, once presented as a unified initiative, now lacked the very thing it needed to exist, a collective endorsement strong enough to carry it forward without question. Without that unity, every aspect of the project became vulnerable. Its structure, its leadership, its purpose. All of it began to feel less secure, less certain, as though the foundation itself had been built on assumptions that could no longer hold. Camilla, according to sources close to the situation, was left facing a reality she had not anticipated. The project that was meant to strengthen her influence now risked exposing its limits. Because in the world of the monarchy, credibility is not just about position, it is about alignment. And when that alignment fractures, even the most carefully planned initiatives can lose their footing. Within internal discussions, the impact was reportedly immediate. Confidence gave way to reassessment. Plans that had once moved forward with ease now slowed, then stalled, and eventually, quietly, they stopped altogether. The postponement was no longer temporary, it became indefinite. And then, without formal acknowledgement, it became final. Outside the palace, the first signs of speculation began to surface. Media observers, always alert to subtle shifts, started to question the silence. Why had the launch disappeared? Why had the narrative changed so quickly? Reports in outlets often associated with royal coverage began to hint at internal disagreements, careful in their wording but unmistakable in their direction. It was no longer just a private matter. The story, once contained, was beginning to leak into public awareness, fragmented, incomplete, but powerful enough to raise questions. And those questions carried consequences. Because for Camilla, the foundation had not simply been a charitable effort, it had been a statement. A declaration of presence, of purpose, of influence within a monarchy navigating uncertainty. Its collapse, however quietly managed, introduced a contrast that could not be ignored. Success, once assumed, had given way to hesitation. Authority, once projected, now faced scrutiny. And within palace corridors, that shift did not go unnoticed. Conversations changed. Perceptions adjusted. The balance, subtle but real, began to tilt. Because when a project of this scale falters, it does more than disrupt plans, it reshapes the dynamics that allowed those plans to exist in the first place. And as the silence around the foundation deepened, one truth became increasingly clear. This was no longer about a cancelled launch. It was about what that cancellation revealed. But the real impact wasn't the cancelled launch, it was the shift in power that followed, one that would redefine relationships moving forward. In the aftermath, something subtle yet undeniable began to change. The balance within the royal family, long maintained through careful coordination, had shifted. Sophie's decision wasn't just a refusal, it was a statement. A quiet assertion that even within the firm, boundaries still existed, and not every initiative would pass without scrutiny, regardless of who stood behind it. At first, the shift was almost imperceptible, detectable only to those who understood the rhythms of the institution, the unspoken rules, the invisible hierarchies, the delicate choreography that keeps everything aligned. But according to reports circulating within palace-adjacent circles, that choreography had been interrupted. Not broken, not dismantled, but altered in a way that could not simply be undone. Sophie, once seen as a steady presence operating quietly within the system, now carried a different kind of weight. Her refusal had not isolated her, it had strengthened her. Because in a structure where compliance is often expected, discernment becomes power. Insiders whisper that her stance began to resonate beyond the immediate situation, reframing how her role was perceived not just as a participant in royal duty, but as a guardian of its integrity. That distinction mattered. It elevated her from reliability to influence, from consistency to authority. And as that perception grew, so did the quiet alignment around her. Prince William, already positioned as the future of the monarchy, reportedly viewed the situation through a lens that prioritized long-term stability over short-term cohesion. Various interpretations suggest his approach began to mirror Sophie's, measured, cautious, and increasingly focused on ensuring that every initiative carried the weight of clear structure and accountability. Princess Anne, long associated with discipline and institutional preservation, was said to embody a similar perspective. Her influence, though rarely displayed openly, reinforced the idea that tradition was not about resistance to change, but about protecting the framework within which change must operate. Together, these forces did not form a visible alliance, but their alignment was felt. It created a quiet center of gravity within the monarchy, one that began to pull decisions toward greater scrutiny, greater care, and greater intention. And within that shifting dynamic, Camilla's position became more complex. Not diminished outright, but undeniably recalibrated. Future initiatives, according to palace whispers, would no longer move forward with the same assumptions. The expectation of automatic endorsement had been replaced by a need for validation layered, deliberate, and no longer guaranteed. That change, subtle as it appeared, carried profound implications. Because it introduced a new standard, one that demanded clarity, transparency, and alignment before action. And once such a standard is established, it does not easily fade. It becomes part of the system itself. Beyond the palace walls, the impact was equally significant, though less defined. Public perception, shaped by fragments of information and carefully worded reports, began to shift in tone. There was no dramatic turning point, no single moment that captured the change. Instead, it unfolded gradually, through questions, through observations, through a growing awareness that something within the monarchy had been tested and had responded with restraint rather than collapse. That contrast mattered. It reinforced the idea that strength within the institution did not come from unquestioned unity, but from the ability to navigate disagreement without losing control. And that realization carried its own quiet power. Because in a world where perception often defines reality, even the smallest shift in understanding can reshape the narrative entirely. Sophie's decision, once seen as a disruption, was now being interpreted as something else, a recalibration. A moment of clarity within a system that rarely allows such moments to surface. And yet, even as the dust settled, one question lingered: what did this moment reveal about the future of the monarchy itself? This was never just about a foundation. It was about legacy, who shapes it, who protects it, and who ultimately decides what becomes part of the monarchy's enduring story. Sophie's refusal had drawn attention to a deeper truth, that behind every public act lies a private negotiation, one that determines not just outcomes, but the very direction of the crown's future. In the quiet aftermath of the collapse, conversations within palace circles reportedly shifted from immediate damage control to something far more profound. Reports suggest that what had once been seen as a contained disagreement began evolving into a wider reflection, an internal reckoning about influence, authority, and the unseen mechanisms that guide royal decisions. Because if one initiative could falter under scrutiny, what did that say about the processes that had allowed it to reach that point in the first place? Insiders whisper that concerns around legacy and control were no longer abstract, they were immediate, pressing, and impossible to ignore. The monarchy, long sustained by its ability to project unity, now faced a more complicated reality. Unity could not come at the expense of clarity. And clarity required accountability. That shift, subtle yet significant, began reshaping how initiatives were viewed moving forward. No longer could they rely solely on tradition or expectation. They needed structure, transparency, and alignment with the broader purpose of the institution. Figures like Sophie, once operating quietly in the background, now represented something more, a stabilizing force, grounded in principle rather than momentum. And as that recognition grew, so did the understanding that the monarchy's future would depend not just on maintaining its image, but on reinforcing the systems that protect it from internal imbalance. Outside the palace, this evolution did not go entirely unnoticed. Public curiosity, fueled by fragments of speculation and carefully worded reports, began to grow. Questions surfaced, not loud, not confrontational, but persistent. What had really happened? What had changed? And more importantly, what did it mean? The monarchy's image, while still intact, entered a new phase of quiet scrutiny, where perception was shaped not just by appearances, but by the subtle signals emerging from within. And yet, as these questions grew louder, the final chapter of this story began to take shape, one defined not by conflict, but by consequence. In the end, there were no dramatic statements, no public acknowledgements, no visible resolution, just silence. But within that silence lay everything: the refusal, the pressure, the collapse, and the shift that followed. Because in the world of the monarchy, what isn't said often carries far more weight than what is. And this silence? It spoke volumes about power, principle, and the future still unfolding behind palace walls. Officially, nothing had happened. There was no confirmation of disagreement, no acknowledgement of tension, no indication that anything had ever gone off course. The foundation simply remained inactive, its timeline undefined, its presence quietly fading from public view. The royal family, as always, continued forward, engagements attended, appearances maintained, duties fulfilled with the same measured consistency the world had come to expect. But beneath that continuity, something had changed. An unspoken understanding had settled into place, one that did not need to be declared to be felt. Boundaries once assumed had now been tested, and in that test, they had been reinforced. Sophie's role, though never publicly elevated, had quietly solidified. She had not sought recognition, nor had she demanded it. Yet through her restraint, through her refusal to yield under pressure, she had redefined what quiet authority looks like within the monarchy. And that redefinition carried weight. Because influence, in this world, is not always measured by visibility, it is often defined by the moments when someone chooses not to move. Still, the tension had not disappeared. It lingered, subtle but persistent, woven into the fabric of future decisions, shaping how initiatives would be approached, how trust would be extended, and how power would be balanced moving forward. Nothing was openly fractured, yet nothing was entirely untouched. And that is what made the silence so powerful, because it contained both resolution and uncertainty, closure and continuation, all at once. Because sometimes, the most powerful moves are the ones made quietly, leaving behind consequences that echo long after the moment has passed. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.